for joining us. If you are looking for the college night for seniors, and parents and guardians of seniors are in the right place. We want to thank you so much for joining us. We know there's a great deal of information and a lot to keep track of for the first couple of weeks of school, and there's emails flooding into your inboxes. So we're happy to have this opportunity to speak to the seniors and parents in one virtual room. And we hope to be able to set the tone for the course of the senior year. We will record this evening's program, so if you want to make sure that you've caught all the things that we've addressed, we'll send that out, and we will also send out a copy of the PowerPoint. This night is listed as a college night for seniors and senior parents and guardians, but we know your time is really important, and we know senior year also isn't just about college. So we've partnered with Mr. Stein, your class dean, to join us tonight and talk about some of the non-college focused events coming up this year. So we hope to make the best use of your time. So you'll hear a little bit from me, well, probably a lot from me actually. You'll hear from Ms. Williams, you'll hear from Mr. Almonte as we address the points that we know are important to outline for you as we move through the next couple of months. I am grateful to them and to Ms. Dunn for her meticulous attention to details. Since so much of the work we do in our office is collective, we have a bit of a hive mind, as I like to call it, built in right into our practice with students and families so that we can eagerly bounce ideas off of one another and fuse our expertise. We regularly will share insights with one another, policy updates, resources, even tap into important relationships with colleagues in the admissions and college offices at schools around the country to provide the best information and advice that we can. I'm also grateful to Dr. Waller, who was going to be with us tonight to say a few words of welcome, but she discovered that her own daughter's college night is tonight over at the Dalton School. And colleagues of mine told me that Calhoun's college night and Trinity's college night are also happening. So I suspect that there's probably college nights happening around the city, around the country, maybe even around the world tonight. I'm also grateful to Ms. Moore for her leadership and her support, and she's here in the audience as well. And while some of what we'll talk about tonight will be logistical, we also hope that the night will bring a hopeful and a positive mindset to the months ahead. We're excited to work with you as collaborators and as guides and shepherds and partners, providing as much clarity and individual focus as possible. So next, we're thrilled to have Mr. Stein here and asked him to talk for a few minutes about the less college-focused part of my senior year. So I think what I'll need to do is stop sharing my slides so he can share his. Is that right, Mr. Stein?
I think so, yeah. Thank you, Ms. Middleton.
Yeah.
All right, hopefully everyone can hear me, but hi everyone, it's really nice to have all of you here. And I suspect many of you are watching together as a family, which is heartening. So thank you to the college office for including me in this program so that I can share some info with you briefly before the college office dives into their presentation. And before I share some slides and info, I wanted to tell a story of something that happened to me yesterday, the first day of regular classes. It was mid-afternoon, around 2 o'clock, and I was totally exhausted from Zoom when I received an email from another teacher who said that a 12th grade student had a bit of a distracting background on Zoom. When I checked in with the student, they said they understood completely that they'll change it, that they have other less distracting backgrounds in their arsenal, quote. And by the way, how is my day going? The student's small but earnest question led to an email conversation about weddings, soca music, and running in Prospect Park. And the students taking the time to ask me about my day was unexpected, although not uncharacteristic of the student. And I thought it was a really good way to use the tools of remote learning to have an organic interaction, not unlike what might happen in the hallways at 181 Lincoln Place. So even though online school is obviously a far cry from a perfect way to spend senior year, I would just encourage students to consider what they might do, however small, to add a little life to someone else's day, and how they also might be open to having their day made by others. So I'll share my screen now so you can see some slides. And I just wanted to share a little bit about last Friday, which was an entire highlight into itself. And I'm so glad many of you came to do sidewalk chalk, art, charades and relay races, and so much more. It was special to have social time on campus outside with physical distance. And we're working hard to have 2 more events this month. So details will be sent out about these events very soon, but one will be next Friday, September 25th, and one will be the following Wednesday, the 30th in the park. In addition, I wanted to highlight how the English and history curricula this week have been building on the discussions students had last week in mixed grade groups around Claudia Rankine Citizen. The English curriculum is encouraging students to engage and activate their own identities and experiences as a part of the school's equity project. The first assignment, the identity collage, was designed to help students see themselves and each other as the full, complex, amazing humans that they are. And the guiding question for this assignment was, what parts of your roots and identity are most important to you? So here you can see some of the collages, and students chose to structure it in all kinds of ways. Here's Gabby's, here's Alex Conklin's, and there's a quotation in each of these collages as well. Here's Serena's, here's Caleb's. And so where the English courses have been working towards self-awareness, authenticity, and community belonging, the history curriculum has foregrounded anti-racism. And this quotation by critical race scholar Ibram Kendi is a good lens for the work, so I'll read it quickly. The good news is that racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities. We can be racist one minute and anti-racist the next. What we say about race, what we do about race in each moment determines what, not who we are. And I think here, Kendi is guiding us to think about anti-racism as action at any given moment that leads to racial equity. So in short, the history curriculum intends to provide the vocab, the tools, and the mindsets that promote anti-racist action and racial equity. And here's a diagram that is more than just a minute of processing, but we're really encouraging students to move from fixed mindset to growth mindset in all facets of their life at school, but I guess in particular, in their work in history class with anti-racism. So this slide is something I can share. Lastly, just a word about tech guidelines and info about the Zoom background that students are aware of, but I also want to make families aware of. And so the text that's highlighted here explains that video on is required and that background should be conducive to focus. If a student is having a tech issue, communication is key. Video waiver is possible, so you can, if you need time away from a screen for certain reasons, you can talk with your advisor and me about that. And tech support in general is a really good resource for any tech problems. And that also in this corner here at the bottom right, all behavioral guidelines that we have in our school handbook apply to our remote learning context. So students are well aware of these guidelines. And then I guess as a final thing, one other thing is that you might invest in these blue light glasses that help if you're getting Zoom fatigue. I know some faculty have done so, and they're potentially a very productive thing for you to do. And so questions from the parent survey, I just want to answer kind of briefly, and I can expound on it more individually. But athletics, we do not know if fall athletics will take place in the spring at this time. We're offering athletic opportunities via Zoom, and we hope to add in-person activities at the time in which school scales up to hybrid. And you can always write to our new athletic director, Mr. Huffman, and schedule time to speak with him if you want more details on your sport. There was a question about orchestra, which will meet if we go hybrid. Otherwise, it will likely not meet. Additionally, the announcement about hybrid plans in October, for October, I know Columbus Indigenous Peoples Day is the date that we were going to recalibrate what is possible with our Zoom and remote learning and hybrid, but the decision will be announced close to October, and we're not sure yet what we're going to do, and it won't be until a few more weeks at least before we know. And then lastly, graduation is planned for Thursday, May 27th. And so now that I've talked about graduation, I feel like I can turn it back to the colleges, because that was like a whole sort of cursory glance at like what we've been doing now. And there'll be more info I'll provide and others will provide as we get into later in the fall and then in the spring. So thank you for having me, and I'll be sticking around.
Thanks, Andrew. I feel like we just zoomed through the senior year. Um, let me see. So we're, as I said, thrilled to have you here tonight to join us in the official fall kickoff of senior year. I love this little cartoon that we borrowed from the New Yorker because it actually pretty aptly describes the college process, but it described it before the global pandemic and it describes it now as well. There's things that are complex about the process, but that's what we're here to help you unravel. And most of the webinar meetings, and I know you've probably been attending your share of them as well, in addition to webinar classes for the students in the room. But most of the webinar meetings I've been attending this summer and fall, and even some of the emails I'm receiving, which you might imagine are from colleges, test prep companies, professional organizations, consultants, et cetera. They refer to the range of challenges that 2020 has brought to us as individuals, as families, as school communities, and well beyond that as a regional, a national, and as global communities. And just today, I got an email essentially meant for college enrollment managers, so people that on the college side are overseeing this process. And it referred to ways in which institutions of higher education must address, and I'm quoting here, their declining enrollment, their tuition revenue, their threatened years of financial strain, their steep downturn in a nation's birth rate, their growing skepticism about the price and value of a college degree. They say higher education must address enrollment declines quickly and effectively before this complex challenge becomes an existential crisis. And I share this, this fairly harshly worded email that actually wasn't for me, really. I share it because the colleges are also assessing the impact of COVID and the impact of what's happening. I share this because the uncertainty that you might feel about what's already kind of an unpredictable process is actually an uncertain task ahead for many of the colleges and universities too. And the usual refrain that colleges use, and that's it depends. The students even heard that in the panel the other day that we had on Reboot Camp Day. It depends is a pretty common refrain. And it's one that they use in response to how things might play out on their campus. Things are even more unknown from their perspective as they assess really the overall enrollment, not just the first year or impact of deferred students, but their overall enrollment. The colleges are also assessing the impact of strains on their financial aid budgets. You know, they've increased packages for students, but they've also increased their plans to be able to fund students for the fall in most cases. They've lost international applicants and will lose those applicants and enrollees. They've already been facing some declining numbers in terms of just the number of high school seniors that apply to college. So as that email references, that literally the population, the demographic population of high school students is lower this year and has been declining over the last several years. Some are looking at increasing the size of their first year class. We've heard this from a few places. They're looking at increasing how much they're going to rely on early decision. They're looking at adjusting deadlines, and we've seen that happen with a few schools already. There's a number that actually have already announced that they're adding early decision too, and we'll go through some of this terminology a little bit later in the webinar. They don't know if their early decision numbers will decline because there's students that are uncertain. There's students that don't have the individual attention that we hope to be able to provide to our families at Berkeley Carroll. And so they're really unsure of what their first steps or next steps should be. And they're concerned about committing to a campus they haven't visited maybe properly. So all this is happening on the college side of the desk, which is what those of us in admissions and college counseling kind of name each other's experiences. While on our side, we've been with you as test dates have become canceled, as hundreds more colleges have declared themselves testing optional or even test blind, and the recent term that we've heard is test agnostic. We're going to completely ignore those tests. We don't believe in them. Students haven't been able to visit physically most of the campuses, and they've often found it, not just at our school, but they've often found it challenging to navigate the virtual options. So hopefully we've been able to give you some organization on that. And the visits that are happening starting this week will give you even more one-on-one contact with the colleges that you might be applying to. And although we normally have about 85% of our class applying either early decision or early action, some have expressed concern about making that commitment here. So we understand that. Many of the parents and guardians on this call may have heard of the case study program we did with students last Tuesday. I can't believe it was a week ago already, during Reboot Camp. The seniors at that point worked with 6 college admission officers. We invited representatives from USC, from New York University, from Juilliard, from Barnard College, from Harvey Mudd College, and from Northeastern University to analyze 3 fictitious applications to a fictitious college that we named Good College. The applications in the college profile were meant to include multiple identities and backgrounds and stories and contexts and experiences, so we made them purposefully kind of complex reads. The students started the experience that day by examining what we call institutional priorities. So those priorities that Good College, as an example, has indicated would be important factors in their admissions process. And then students had the opportunity to read each of the applications as small committees, present their findings to their groups, argue a bit back and forth about the merit of applications, and make a decision for which of the 3 applicants to admit to Good College. So what we hope that the case studies did was help students to see that while the process is human, with people making decisions about those applications, arguing points and feeling passionate about that, some things are actually out of their control. You know, one year a college might be looking for Greek majors, tuba players, point guards, any students from one of the Dakotas. They might be considering that the applicant pool of high school seniors, and this is high school seniors overall, is 57% female identified. And they might like their campus to have nearly as many identifying students who identify as male as students who identify as female. Or the college might be interested in increasing the number of female identifying students in a STEM, a computer science program, or an engineering program. And then next year, the goals might include something else. So I realize that a case study can be somewhat of a simplistic assessment, and it's kind of inaccurate because you're not ever choosing just one applicant from 3 for a college. There's many things about every applicant that are being discussed and considered. And many of our peers on the college side would talk about how their job is to find reasons to admit students rather than find reasons to deny them. But it's important, I think, for students to have an understanding that institutions have priorities, and there are things that we can't always predict, nor can we become those priorities. So I suppose that all of this is kind of part of what I want to say by starting to address and name at the same time, you know, kind of face those challenges, but at the same time, I want to make it clear that the opportunities that lay before us are also pretty exciting. We're talking about the future of our students. I want to make sure that they understand that there are many things still that we can control within this process, and even so within uncertain times. The practical steps we can take to compel positive outcomes, the many things for which I am joyful and grateful that we're able to share with you over the coming months. So I'll go over the agenda for this evening. If we were back at Berkeley Carroll, this is what the college office would look like instead of being in these little boxes. So first, why do we hold this kickoff meeting? You know, we've been meeting with students throughout the summer and starting last spring or last winter actually, when we started meeting with you. We hold a kickoff meeting like this because though we realize that much of our advice is really about the individual, you know, when students are asking questions or families are asking questions about should I test or not? Is an interview important at this college? Is this story that I plan to share in my personal statement telling enough about me? How much will finances play a role in admission decisions at this college? You know, they're going to meet my need. Is my family going to be able to afford to attend this college? Am I a competitive applicant to this college, given my academic program, grades, et cetera? Should I apply early? Now, all of the answers to these questions could be for different students, even those with similar profiles and statistics. Still, tonight is meant to outline some of what is universal to expect over the next months. There are logistics that we want to make sure that we communicate to you. There's a calendar, and we will follow up not only with the recording of tonight and information and a copy of the PowerPoint, but we'll also follow up with a calendar, so you'll be able to track this information. But we look at it as a way to manage the, if you will, a triangle of information that goes from student to parent to college counselor. It turns out that not all students will freely share details that happened at school. So tonight will help to ensure that we're a little bit more on the same page for what's to come. And for a portion of tonight, we are going to talk about the logistics of lists and deadlines, the ways to organize, and the road ahead. We'll also address ways in which we are prepared to support our students and hopefully make that clear. The other reason we hold this meeting is to share thoughts on how parents can be most supportive and how students can help too. You, the parents and guardians of these seniors, you know them best, and you want the best for them, as we do. We think it's important to talk about things like family dynamics as well as our partnership with you, because as it pertains to the college process, roles change a little bit at home. Students are more in the driver's seat, but certainly we think about parents as partners. It's never just something that rests on the shoulders of your students or on our shoulders. You know, we look to go through this process with you. And honestly, some of the stress about the college process isn't really about college at all, but it expresses itself in all kinds of ways. So we want to share some perspective and experience that might help the year go a little bit more smoothly. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Almonte. I'll advance the slide.
Thank you, Ms. Middleton. So we're talking about some of the logistics and the deadlines that Ms. Middleton was speaking about. We do want to give you all a snapshot of what the road ahead will look like. We thought if we organized kind of what should be happening each month, specific deadlines that are in bold that I'll go into on the next slide. But to give you really a snapshot and general overview of what it is in terms of what this journey is going to be and your progress. So throughout the months of September and October, students should be meeting with their college counselors quite frequently to discuss their college lists, their essays, their supplements, and to prepare for interviews. Understanding that you've been doing a lot of research throughout the summer and really kind of brainstorming your essay topics, now is time for execution. And with understanding more or less what your list might be looking like and identifying schools, will determine what is going to be the next steps through your process. So with our schedules now, obviously we were in the first weeks of school and it was faculty work week, so we were quite busy. But now basically our schedules are wide open. And we encourage you to take advantage of our Calendly links or to reach out to us directly to schedule meetings, because our virtual doors are wide open to meet with all of you and guide you through this process. We're fortunate enough to work at a very resourced high school that allows for individualized attention, where our caseloads are very manageable for us to be able to guide you through all these processes and have those personal conversations as they relate to you and your families navigating this process. Maybe it's financial situation, so on and so forth. We do encourage you to check out our Calendly link. I know that I mentioned that before, but that's the easiest way through this virtual format. That'll make it easy to, schedule a meeting for yourself or for your parents at a time that works for you, when you can see what slots are open for us. It just makes it more of a seamless process because, as we're not in Berkeley Carroll physically, we don't have the luxury that you can just walk in our doors and sit on our couches like before, but we always say that our Calendly links and our virtual doors are wide open, and we can't reiterate that enough. Please schedule meetings. Please sit down and talk to us, because there are important things that we need to speak with you about. a lot of times it's anxiety, and having a conversation with your counselor allows you to know that things are a lot worse in your head. And when we talk things through and create a plan with you, you'll realize that you're actually quite on track. And I like to say that I think a lot of the students at this point are playing compare and contrast, but knowing that every college list is going to be different, every experience is going to be different from your friends or other colleagues at different schools. So really kind of sitting down and understanding what it is that you have to do is really key in this process, because not everybody is looking at the same schools. And like I said, not everybody has the same process. So the months of September, October, like I said, are really important in terms of meeting. And it's really important for you to narrow down and balance your college list to continue preparing applications. And a useful tool that we have during this time is we still have college representatives coming to visit Berkeley Carroll virtually. So students, I'm sure all of you are aware of this, and parents, if you're not, we are offering the opportunity for your students to sign up for college representatives through their SCORE account. And with this, college representatives who normally visit Berkeley Carroll in person to meet with our seniors are signing up virtually. They're still reaching out. They still want to create this connection with our students and partner with us. And logging into SCORE, the students will be able to see how many of schools are visiting, what time, and what day and what time. And they have the opportunity for students to present themselves well to admissions officers, who may read their applications first by signing up for these individualized sessions. These a lot of times can become pretty particular about the application process, especially for schools that look at demonstrated interests. They are looking to see that our students are engaging with them, that they have the opportunity to sit down and attend the session, because a lot of times that is something that plays a factor for some of the schools that your students are looking at. If any of the schools on your following list are on your following list, you'll see a notification. And then you can click the little 3-line sandwich on the top of the right-hand corner of your screen that will basically talk about the events and the deadlines to view a full list of all the colleges that are visiting, and they're starting to sign up. This was actually our second day today of visits. And what we've done is we've purposely crafted the schedule for the meetings to fall outside of any academic course meetings. And we did that purposely so that way you can maximize being a student, but also having the opportunity to meet with the college representatives. And the only time that you'll ever see a conflict with any of these representatives coming to visit is going to be with physical education classes, or if there might be, maybe it's a club organization or something that's meeting at a different time that isn't set in stone. And what we are asking at the college office is that you request permission 2 working days in advance to be able to get the okay from your teacher to be able to sit in on any of those sessions. Some visits are overlapping. So, there might be 2 schools that you're looking at, and maybe by chance they're overlapping at the same time. So if you're unable to meet with, a college because you want to see one or the other, we always suggest if you're not able to make the meeting or there's something that's conflicting, to maybe just pop into the meeting, introduce yourself, fill out any virtual inquiry cards that they might have. Or you can connect with your college counselor, Mrs. Dunn, to get the contact information of who the representative was, to introduce yourself and touch base with the college or university, because a lot of times that can go the mile. Basically, if you let your counselor know, we'll express interest for you and we'll provide contact information, like I said. And you can click on the count me in to sign up for the session. And these meetings are specifically designed for students. And we're asking, parents and families to kind of honor that professional and academic boundary so that the students can kind of utilize that space to feel comfortable, to ask questions, and to really have the opportunity to connect with admissions officers one-on-one, because it is useful for those interactions as they do go the mile, especially when they're preparing for interviews. Outside of that, if say you do miss a session or you get sick, we are recording all of them and we're in conversation as an office in terms of how we're going to share that. But just know you will have access to any of the virtual sessions that you've missed through a pre-recorded cloud that we'll be able to share at some point. Maybe it'll be through the college classroom, or maybe we'll have a link on the back end. But once we figure that out as a collective, we will blast that information to the class as well as to the families. In terms of the calendar that you see right here, one event that I want to highlight is on the 23rd. So it's a financial aid program that we are running with, in conjunction and in collaboration with Brooklyn Friends School, Packer Collegiate Institute, and St. Anne's. And this event is for families that are applying for financial aid or that will have questions and want to learn about the financial aid process. And we have John Leach, who is the director of financial aid at Emory University, and he will be offering any advice from his many, many years of experience in the field at Emory University and Davidson College. And it's a great way to learn about, you know, financial aid terminology, financial literacy, understanding the process, and asking some more general questions in terms of if applying for financial aid is something that would be conducive to you and your family's financial situation. Families that are applying for financial aid must be mindful that they will eventually be completing the FAFSA and the CSS profile if it's applicable for specific schools that coincide with admissions deadlines that the student is applying for. So each school will have different requirements for financial aid documents. And I'd encourage all of you students and families, if you're thinking about applying for financial aid or if financial aid is a component in some of the schools that you're looking at, to get in the habit of creating your own standalone document for financial aid to track basically when the deadlines are, what documents are going to be required. A lot of times certain schools might have their own respective financial aid application. And if you are working with any one of us as your counselors, you know, I encourage you to come and speak with us maybe before or after the financial aid night. So that way we can get you situated and organized in terms of what you're going to have to be on the lookout for, and in a way that is clear and concise, a way for you to feel ready to go and not overwhelmed by balancing both the admissions process and the financial aid process. And then moving forward, so a lot of the bolded events and deadlines that were on the previous page are basically what's on this page right now. So I'll go into each of those deadlines. So the first essay draft for your common application personal essay and your activities list was due by September 8th, which, you know, we are well past that date. So if we already have been receiving these drafts and these working lists, but if you haven't been able to complete them or you haven't been able to submit them, we understand that, you know, it's a new year, it's a virtual year, we've completely changed our schedule, so we completely understand that. What we're asking is that to get you in a really good place, that, you know, you have something solid that we can work with, that we can send back to you and kind of mold and shape together. We suggest a very strong suggestion if you can get that done by the 18th, so this Friday. And that way it'll provide ample time for myself, Ms. Middleton, and Ms. Williams to go through and provide you feedback and make suggestions in terms of your thoughts, your ideas, or what you've been writing down. And with thinking about the essay draft, the sooner that we receive an essay draft, the sooner that we can provide this feedback. And the essay is a little bit more complex in the sense that it's not just your writing, but it's also understanding what you want to articulate, your thoughts, any themes that you want to incorporate in the essay. With this first draft, understanding that the essay does not have to be an exact 650 words and it does not have to be polished to perfection. At this point in time, the first draft, we just kind of want to see what your ideas are, what you're thinking of, you know, more or less where your brain is going. And then basically it allows us to guide you on your thought process and help shape and articulate your thoughts and ideas. The essay is something that gets revised over and over and over again. You know, it's very much an ongoing process. So the sooner that we see your first draft, the sooner we can start that ongoing process of shaping it to the perfect essay that justifies and honors the story and experience that you want to share with the admissions counselors. In terms of your activities list, this can be the most difficult part of completing the base questions for the common application. And I say that because there is an activity limit. So it's not that you can list every activity that you've ever been a part of. And there are descriptions that are limited to 150 characters. So with the activity list, you have to be organized, you have to be clear, and you have to be succinct, which I think a lot of times can be a little bit of a loop for some of the students when they're trying to figure out how to plot everything down. And you basically what we're here for is we help you sharpen your language. We help you understand how you can describe your activities and your involvement, but also highlighting achievements that are clear and organized for the applicant reviewer to understand what it is that you've done at the school and what your achievements are. You know, I had a conversation with a student today about you know, them being on the basketball team, and through conversation learned that they were a point guard, and we are actually able to put that in the description as well as the position that they've had on the team. So lots of times things get lost in translation, and having a second pair of eyes on it who have actually worked for admissions as well too definitely goes a mile in terms of shaping your application. An easy way to submit this is if you complete the activity list in your Common Application, you can actually preview it and see exactly what it's going to look like. And then you have the option to save it, and you can save it as a PDF. The PDF can be sent to your respective college counselor. And then from there, we can go in and make edits and recommendations. You know, everyone's going to be a little different. I actually sometimes will work live with the student, whatever works for you, but we find that it's easier for us to take it, have some time to think about it, put our edits in and send it back to you. So when you save the document, just remember to save your name and your activities list and send it back to us, or else we get a handful of activities list, and then we have to kind of figure out who is who. The draft of your supplements is going to be due ideally on October 2nd. So for people who might not understand the application process, there is the larger essay, which will be the Common Application essay, which is more of that personal story. The supplements are going to be additional questions that respective colleges and universities are asking. So I always like to say they're more mini essays. And a lot of times they're trying to gauge the interest or the commitment that the student wants to make with the institution. By learning that they've researched the institution, understand it, or they want to learn a little bit more about the applicant. So the first part of tackling your supplement, I personally believe, is organizing them and understanding how many you need to write and by what deadline. So adding your schools to the Common Application will allow you to see how many schools are asking required and or optional supplemental questions. And then you might be in for a surprise and realize that some of the schools that you're looking at do not need a supplement at all. So realistically, you want to identify which schools you'll be applying to in the early round. So maybe it's going to be early action or early decision. And you want to prioritize those supplements before moving on to any early decision 2 or regular decision deadlines for colleges and universities. It's a wise decision to complete any optional supplements that apply to you, as it can present a helpful opportunity. Ms. Middleton likes to say optional equals opportunity to show commitment throughout the application process. And it also allows the institution to get to know you a little bit more. I'd encourage students to scan each college and university's respective set of questions and tabs. So on the Common Application, once you add all your schools, there's you can go to My Colleges, and there's a drop-down menu where basically you can see if there's a supplement. But I always get in the habit of checking every tab because sometimes they're hidden in there, and then making note of what those questions actually are and then what their word count is. It's really easy to put everything in one document and just have a running document to just be able to scroll down and see what is being asked and what needs to be completed by when. Because then you'll find that, you know, maybe you have 10 supplements to write, maybe it's 7, maybe it's 12. But you'll have an understanding of how much time you have, and then you can create a schedule and organize yourself to complete your supplements in a timely manner. Supplements are basically, the way I like to think of them, they're short answers. So very much a shorter writing process than the Common Application essay. However, I will say that they oftentimes require a lot of research and reflection to execute them correctly. So there is a lot more work sometimes that goes into scanning websites, speaking with representatives, watching videos, going on a tour if you had the option to do that, whether that's virtual or in person, to be able to kind of craft a supplement that has to do with maybe what the institution is looking for. In terms of October 19th, we will be providing a form to ask for your preliminary list of colleges by that time. At this point, we understand that things still can change. We understand that, you know, you're still looking at some schools, you still have some time, but we want a list from students that that there's a form that you and your parents are in agreement for. And what this allows us to do is basically through our hive mind, we can look at your lists together. And if we feel that there is a list that's not balanced, maybe there's too many reaches, maybe there's, too many middles, so on and so forth, we can kind of look at your list and understand what we should suggest for you. We never want you to be in a position where all the schools are reaches and we let you apply to all those reaches. And unfortunately that year, it's a really selective year. And there's no foundations or academic foundations or financial foundations for a student to be able to fall back on if necessary. And when we're looking at your reaches, your middles, and your foundation schools, they should be schools that you can see yourself at, that you can be happy at, because best case scenario, you're getting into your dream school. But if there's a little bit of a different scenario and you're ending up going to maybe a middle or a foundation school, it's still a place that you can see yourself at. It's still a place that you can be happy at. But the kind of this audit process that we have and understanding that we're going back to you, reviewing your list with you and suggesting things so that way there's a bit more balance, absolutely goes the mile and absolutely lets you know that you have a list that's solid, that's balanced, and that you can go into the process with some reassurance. You can see the last final college list and final draft of the essay for January deadlines, as well as the final essay draft and supplements for early decision deadlines are going to be a little different. So like we said, prioritizing those early rounds is going to be ideal. And we want ideally for everything to be done by October 26th. So, with prioritizing the schools, this allows 1 week for a final review from your counselors to ensure that everything is reviewed and that you're putting your best foot forward with your early application, and that you have a 1 week buffer that if anything needs to change, that you have some time in between to basically get everything together and submit your application. So those would be the early rounds. And then from there, you would move forward with the rest of your regular decision schools. And what we have come up with in terms of a deadline for that is your final college list and final draft of the essay for your January deadlines would be due on December 4th. And this will allow for ample turnaround time to ensure that things are completed and that you're working on with your counselor to review everything before leaving for break and pressing submit before the deadline. And that's really, really, really important. So you can see from the last bullet point that we expect all applications completed and ready to go and that they're ready to go and be submitted if you want to by December 18th. And you might be asking like, why is it so early? The deadline is January 1st. But if you're on top of the things now, we can't stress that enough. We can both, the counselors as well as the students, but mainly the students, have your break. We are very willing to, work with students as things come. But in a perfect world, all the students would be done. They have time to, perfect everything. Everything's ready to go. And then you get to have a wonderful winter break where you're free of any college homework, where you're free of any applications. And most importantly, you are free of Zoom because we would still have to be meeting on Zoom. So we can't stress that enough. It really is ideal that if you plan all of this accordingly, if you stick to the deadlines and you stick with, meeting with your college counselor and, talking things through, it's very realistic that everything can be done by all these deadlines and that you can relax, unwind, and, deserve a real great restful break.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about getting organized. And you've heard a little bit about this already, but one thing we really want you to remember is that there are a lot of moving pieces to the college application. And so the best thing you can do for yourselves, in addition to keeping on top of the deadlines that Mr. Almonte just mentioned, is make a spreadsheet similar to the one on the screen right now. You want to include the supplements you have to write if there are any, deadlines, scholarship interview opportunities, and interview that you scheduled or need to schedule, and the deadlines for when you have to do those things. One of the things we know about this year is that demonstrated interest, it will look different given that in-person visits are largely canceled. So we want you to make use of the opportunities afforded to you. Interview when possible. Just make sure you're checking schools' websites to know what the deadlines are for interviews if you're applying early action or early decision or regular decision. attend any virtual information sessions and tours, come to the virtual visits hosted by BC that you've already heard a little bit about. And these, remember, these are the best opportunities to engage with the colleges that you are interested in. We can go to the next slide. And this is probably the most important thing. You will hear us reiterate this over and over and over and over again. Please add all of the colleges that you are applying to SCORE. It doesn't matter if you're using the Common application, the Coalition application, the UC application, or some schools will offer you a priority application. You want to make sure that every college and university you are applying to is in SCORE. And the reason why you want to do that is because we can't send out your supplemental materials if we don't know where you're applying. So in order for us to send out your teacher recommendations, your transcripts, your counselor recommendation, or any supplemental recommendations you may have, we need to know where we're sending those things. So please, please, please make sure that your SCORE account is up to date. We know things are going to move around. If you decide you're not going to apply somewhere, all you have to do is remove it from your colleges that I'm applying to list. And we check that pretty regularly to make sure that we're sending out all of your materials in a timely fashion. Next slide, please. So this chart represents what we consider a balanced college list, a healthy mix of foundation, middle, and reach schools. And it's important to remember that each student's list is going to look a little different according to their academic profile, your interests, and other requirements. The average BC student applies to 8 to 10 schools. But of course, it's possible that students might even apply to 12 schools, or you might find that we have some students who only ever applied to 1 school because they apply early decision, they get good news, and then they don't have to submit the rest of the applications. But one of the things we worry about is when a student's list climbs to 15, 17, or even 20 applications, and it's happened before. It happened last year, in fact. And one of the reasons why we worry about this is because we know there's a finite amount of energy that each student has to apply to an individual college. You know, once you finish writing your common application essay, those supplemental essays can take a lot out of you. I was actually on a counselor workshop today with Tufts, Northeastern, and Boston College. And one of the things and BU, I believe, and one of the things that they kept reiterating over and over again was, please tell your students not to cut and paste their supplements. They can tell it doesn't feel authentic, and they don't get a sense that you know the school really well. And that's part of what those supplements are meant to do. And so it's also important that the list of schools that you're applying to makes sense. We want you to make informed choices. And so that goes back to never hesitating to reach out to us to set up a conversation where we can look at data together, because sometimes that's really helpful in framing what your list should look like. I once had a student apply to 17 colleges. Some they were deeply interested in, others they applied to because they fit a certain level of prestige. The list itself, when I did the math, was over 70% reach or super reach schools. And the final results were not what the student or the parents had hoped for. And in my experience, there's also a finite amount of energy a student and family has for, or feeling you have for bad news. We want to make sure that you're getting a lot of good news in this process, and that you have a number of schools to choose from when it comes time. So when April hits, you have several choices that you're choosing from, and not just 1 or 2. And it sort of goes back to what Mr. Almonte said. We want you to be happy with every school that you're applying to. So when you look at your final list of colleges, I want you to love your reach schools, I want you to love your foundation schools, and we want you to love your middle schools. So we are going to help you develop that final list that represents your talents and your goals, and knowing that we're going to be your biggest cheerleaders. We're going to support you through every aspect of this application process, so that when you hit submit to the colleges, you know that you've submitted the strongest application you could have possibly put together. But we're also going to be honest with you and make sure that you're making good choices. So as you shape that list, that balanced list, we want you to ask yourself these questions. Who will your peers be at these schools? What do they care about? Who or what are your resources? Will the community provide diverse perspectives to challenge your growth? Will it be too comfortable? We actually had a student who looked at her final choices, and she had gotten into one of her top schools off of the waiting list. And she realized that if she went there, she'd be too comfortable, that things may become a little bit too easy for her. And so she chose a place that might challenge her a little bit more. Even though when we talked about early decision in September, her first choice had been the other school. You want to ask yourself, will it continue to broaden your ethical and critical understanding of the world? Is it an inclusive and caring community? Do they seem to care about the same things you care about? And if you go to this place, will you be encouraged and supported? So when you're finalizing that list, those are the questions you want to ask yourselves to make sure that you have a balanced list of schools where you'll thrive and be really happy. So we just wanted to quickly go over some of the terms that you might have forgotten from last year, but we just want to make sure that everybody's clear on how you might be applying to any or all of your schools. I'm going to use Ms. Middleton's terminology because I think it's fun, but Ms. Middleton often says that early decision, which can happen in either early decision 1 or early decision 2, is kind of like a marriage, right? It's a binding contract that you are making with that school, and you can only apply to one early decision school at a time. The first round for early decision is usually November 1st or 15th. And as we mentioned earlier, some schools have added a second round, and that deadline might be January 1st or January 15th. So if you hear back from your first choice early decision school, it's not the news you want, and there's a second school that you really, really love, that might be a school that you apply to early decision to if possible. Early action or priority deadlines are sort of like dating. You don't have to make a commitment, but you'll hear back from them around the same time you might hear back from an early decision school. And you can apply to more than one school early action. You can apply to one school early decision and 3 schools early action, but you're not making a commitment to those early action schools. And those deadlines will probably be around the same time, October 15th, sometimes for some of the Southern schools, November 1st or November 15th. And there are a couple who even have deadlines of December 1st. Very few schools offer single choice early action or restricted early action. And Ms. Middleton calls this going steady, right? You don't have to make a commitment, but you can't see other schools. You can apply early action to other schools, and you can apply early decision to other schools. Some schools will allow you to make an application to an in-state institution, but you can apply to another private institution. And so typically it's places like Princeton, Harvard, and Yale that have this. We want, and some of them may have removed it for this coming season. So we want you to make sure that you're checking those deadlines and those application processes, because many of the schools have decided that given the pandemic, they're going to just have everybody apply regular decision. But we want you to remember that if you apply to a school restricted early action, it removes the advantages of applying early decision someplace else. And then lastly, there's regular decision, which is equated to playing the field. You can wait and see what happens. Those deadlines tend to be in January, the 1st, the 15th, or even in February, but we still want those applications to be ready to go by mid-December. Sorry. So the decision about how and when to apply is going to be unique to every student, and sitting down with your college counselor to strategize and make a plan for your applications is vital to this process. We do this by looking at Berkeley Carroll specific data to help you with your decision making. How do you make a choice for an early decision school? We think early decision is best employed when you have a clear sense that the school where you want to apply ED is your #1 choice. Excuse me. The decision to go early decision is one that you should also make as a family, after you've carefully considered the financial implications of that decision. And the reason why we say that is because if you're admitted to your early decision school and you're applying for financial aid, you won't have the benefit of comparing multiple financial aid packages from different schools. Applying ED is your chance to show your first choice college that you are committed to them, something they take into account when they're evaluating your application for admission. And while we have seen some colleges take a good portion of their class in the early decision round, ED is not a magic wand that will exponentially increase your chances of being admitted to the school. You still want to make sure that you have all of the, the academic profile that they might be looking for, that you're engaged with your community, that you put together really strong essays and supplements. It doesn't wave a magic wand, but it can say to that school, if you admit me, I'm definitely coming. And everybody likes a little bit of security, right? And then we also recognize that this year is unique in that the majority of students will not be able to do in-person visits with the colleges they're interested in. But with my conversations with colleagues at high schools and colleges from across the country, one of the things we realize is that this year students have the potential to be among the most informed applicants the colleges will see, given how much access you've had to a multitude of virtual events and information sessions. So while you may not have had the opportunity to walk on campus and have that physical connection with the school, in a sense, you've had more access to the college than any student who's really come before you, because they're making themselves incredibly available. If you email our local rep, if you sign up for those information sessions, they're giving you more access to students than you might have had in the past, more access to the admissions officers that you've had in the past. So we want to make sure that you're taking advantage of all of those things as you're making some of your decisions. I'm going to pass it back to Ms. Middleton, but I also just want to remind everybody, if you have questions you want us to answer, we'll do some live Q&A at the end, but we can also answer some questions if you put them in the chat box while we are presenting.
So a few words about how we can help and assist in balancing those lists. You see here that first bullet point. College counseling is an art, not a science. So our predictions about where a student's likely to get in is based upon best case scenarios, the data that we have in front of us, keeping our ears to the ground and listening to what colleges say about the year ahead, listening to our colleagues that we connect with across the country to gain better understanding of what might be happening this year. But those predictions can also be imperfect. So it's important to recognize that colleges sometimes change their trajectories, that they increase their applicant pools, they over-enroll the prior year, and it does make things complicated. Now, the good news is that collectively, between Ms. Williams, Mr. Almonte, and me, we have nearly 50 years of experience in this field. So we do our best to make accurate assessments. Our advice to you and to your students in the confines of our office sometimes sounds conservative. And as I hand out preliminary college lists to families in the spring, that's something that I always hopefully make pretty clear, that this preliminary list is going to be somewhat conservative. Don't mistake that label of being a little bit more conservative about our predictions. Don't mistake it to be a lack of faith in your students' abilities or in your abilities if you're the student listening to this webinar. We're going to look carefully at the data available. You know, as I said, both the BC specific information, the scattergrams that we can provide access to through our Zoom calls, and the college's national and international data. We can tap into that expertise collectively. And we also know that there's a lot of students from a lot of schools like ours. They're different from ours, they're similar to ours, but they're often applying to colleges from places around the country and around the world. So we want to give you the best information. We want to support you, but we also want to be really clear about making sure that we're all on the same page with that data. So if we see a student that has what we might call a far reach on their list, we'll be clear about that. We may have concerns, as Ms. Williams said, about limited energy, about time spent on other applications. We also know that there's a lot of colleges out there who would be thrilled to have a Berkeley Carroll student enroll. Our students come to campus ready to learn, ready to do research, ready to write papers, ready to be community members. So you're a hot commodity in that way. And as I said, we've also seen some of the disappointments. So this does not mean it's an opportunity to throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. What you can trust is that we're going to be straight shooters. We want your student to succeed. We want you to succeed. We want you to feel good about your final college choice. And there'll be times when that means telling you something you might not want to hear. So note that we're going to do everything in our power to help you write the best applications. I think you've probably heard that from me a number of times already. And also trust that when we sit down to write a letter of recommendation on your behalf, when we pick up the phone to talk with a college, we are always enthusiastic advocates for our students. One last piece of advice for parents, and this has been something that I've read psychologists talk about it. I'll give you a little bit of information about it, but other schools have talked about it, and families have come back and said, this is actually a really good piece of advice. I would recommend committing to what psychologist Michael Thompson calls the college diet. On the college diet, college is only on the menu a couple times a week. So as you're sitting down to dinner together, as you're having passing conversations, as you are having, smaller collective conversations about college, think about bringing down the number of times that you have this conversation. I think adults in general, from relatives to neighbors to the dentist, they all want to talk about college. My dentist wants to talk about college. And sometimes it's not healthy. So if you're able to find a way to limit the college talk to maybe a couple of dinners a week or a couple of bracketed times a week, I think you'll probably find that the quality of conversations about college will increase dramatically. And at the same time, you'll experience, as many others have experienced, fewer meltdowns, fewer screaming matches, and fewer slam doors. So it's not a promise, but it's something that has been spoken about by families in the past. The last thing that I want to address before I hand it back to Mr. Almonte for a bit, and then we take questions, is what will make this a successful year. There's no promises that we can make about outcomes, certainly. But I love this quote from Maya Angelou: success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it. I remember when I applied for college myself, there was a college that asked the question, how do you define success? And I remember at 17, I was like, I have no idea what that means. And I find that now what it means is really defining those things that I can control, defining those things in a process that I can control, and not allowing a process to happen to me. It's about having some agency about how I go about what I do, the steps that I can take to get to, hopefully to the point that I'm where my goals will bring me. I have to ask myself, am I true to myself? Am I doing what I'm doing for the right reasons? Am I being realistic about the outcomes I'm hoping to achieve? And hopefully that advice that comes from my heart and comes from Maya Angelou, who I admire a great deal, will resonate with you. There's 4 sort of practical things that I would say are going to bring success for you. One is engagement. And I'm thinking about communication, being able to be communicative with your family, but also communicative with the college office and with the colleges themselves. We need students to be on board and on our calendars. You've heard us a couple of times talk about Calendly. You have the ability to look at our schedules, and we've left any open time, any time that you don't have class, anytime there are breaks, those are available. And if you can't find a time, be sure to reach out to Ms. Dunn, because she's usually pretty magical about being able to do that. We do expect that students are going to schedule fairly regular meetings with us so that we can provide the kind of attention that we've talked about. We like to think about, the second thing that I'll point out is partnership. We think of this counseling relationship as one that includes students, but also includes parents and guardians. Students, we can't apply to college for you, neither can or should your parents or guardians, but we'll definitely assist you in crafting your best essays and applications, and we'll be sure to provide our best advice that we can. The third thing that I think will help make it a successful year is having an open mind. We do ask for you to submit a preliminary final college list so we can really examine that list and make sure it's balanced. We ask you to submit a final college list as well. And part of what we're trying to make sure is that you've realistically considered all of the options you've selected. Do all of your schools have a 5% admit rate? That probably isn't going to be the best final college list that you can provide to us. Are they all places you'd be happy to attend? I think that's always, Ms. Williams talked about this a little bit, about middles and foundations. You should be happy with them. Have you done enough research to know whether a place is really a good fit for you? And one of the things I got to say that I've noticed, we've only done 2 days of college visits on Zoom so far this fall. But one of the things that I've noticed in sitting on meetings this week is that the research that students have done during COVID has been actually better than in prior years. It's been better for many of our students. They've watched those videos, they've spent time on websites, and I honestly never have experienced more kind of data-driven or detailed questions. So we're going to do a discussion during, I think it's on Monday's senior meeting. I'll do a couple of minutes on what's going to improve the way that you approach the colleges in these meetings, because I know not everybody is feeling as confident, but we'll do that. And I think it'll give you even more confidence going into those discussions and being able to ask good questions. The fourth thing that I'll say is going to bring some more success is patience. You know, I ask you all to have patience with yourselves and with each other. Rather than getting frustrated with your teen, please reach out to us. You know, that's a message for parents and guardians. Also have patience with yourselves as students and as families, because the effects of the racial and health pandemic all around us is real. And finally, a word about the support that we provide. We have a class of 83 students. Is that right, Ms. Dunn? I always keep losing track of the number there. 83 students. We have 3 full-time college counselors and a full-time office operations manager. We are among the most well-resourced colleges in the country. And for that, I am extraordinarily grateful. One parent asked this week if they needed to hire a consultant to help their student apply to college. And while we realize that there might be some families who hire someone to assist with college essays, or they'll tap into a subject tutor for help with essays, we find that because we are able to offer nearly 50 years of collective experience in working with kids on writing college essays or reading the essays on the college side from the perspective of an admissions officer, we're able to provide pretty darn good advice. So in addition to the essay writing seminars and workshops that we offered in the spring, we'll meet with students as often as possible, as often as they need, from the brainstorming stage to the final draft. So students that might have submitted a draft at this point that they aren't happy with, you know, we're going to give you feedback on that, and we're going to set you in a direction that's going to feel good for you, and you will be telling your story. This is true of the supplemental essays as well. We provide a lot of support and a lot of direction on how these will work. So when families hire an outside consultant, we often see the following. We see a student who comes in to their counselor less frequently, which often means we don't know as much as we need to know in order to guide a student to the best of our ability. And unlike the school counselor, the consultant often can't speak to colleges directly on behalf of a student, where we have that access point. Nor do they write a letter of recommendation on behalf of the student. And those students who have sat through interviews with us so far this fall for the letters of recommendation that we will write, they know that we get to know them pretty well. I think it's also a challenge for the students sometimes to have advice from 2 different sources, especially if that advice is conflicting. So if you are working with someone outside, we ask that you just make sure that you keep your BC counselor well in the loop of discussion so we can continue to be your best advocate. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Almonte for our final informational slide. Before we answer some of the Q&A that may not have already been answered, some of you might remember that Lewis came to Berkeley Carroll from NYU admissions with previous experience at Lehigh. Lewis also came to us with a master's degree in mental health counseling. And we're really grateful for him for his insights into how to manage self-care and what can be a stressful time.
Absolutely, thank you. Ms. Middleton added this little graphic. You know, I think now more than ever, it's something that resonates with thinking about, you know, viruses are contagious, but so is panic, fear, hysteria, but also calm, love, enthusiasm, kindness, joy. Choose wisely. This absolutely applies to the college application process. This is going to be a long process. I won't say that it'll be difficult, because it's not difficult for everybody. But I think that it poses some, you know, challenges throughout the way and some obstacles that take some hard work. We also understand that you are a full-time Berkeley Carroll student, that you are, you know, sometimes you're a brother or a sister or a caretaker, you have a job, all these things that are going on. And there might be times where you feel like you're wearing multiple hats and you're stretched thin. So in times like that, you know, we encourage you to express yourself throughout this process, whether you're happy, sad, angry. You know, with thinking about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all interconnected, and they can induce stress and anxiety. You know, sometimes one leads into the other, and then it's this cycle where a person kind of ends up with either positive coping skills or negative coping skills. And we encourage you to lean into your emotions and express them in a healthy manner. We want to start kind of encouraging those positive coping skills. And sometimes that has to do with understanding that there's time for the college process, but there's also time for family, and there's also time for fun, and then there's also time for academics. Talk about how this process is making you feel, and with your family, but also with your friends, faculty, and counselors. As bottling things up can lead to physical and mental health issues. I've had multiple meetings where there was no set task with any of my caseload, anybody on my caseload, where I've just sat down and I just talked to them about how they were feeling and what was going on. And a lot of times, myself, Ms. Middleton, and Ms. Williams, we are college, but I also like to emphasize with the counseling piece is that we understand what you're going through, and we want you to leave our doors or our virtual doors with a sense of feeling like you are a little less heavy. We want to contain your anxiety, and what we will always say is that we're vessels. When you're overflowing, pour into us, pour into whoever is supporting you. And also understand that this process does not have to be shared with everybody. I mentioned the game of compare and contrast earlier. As soon as some of my students started comparing and contrasting with each other, that's when I've had some conversations about not being able to do that. You don't have to talk about this entire process, where you're applying, what you're doing. I think that in and of itself is to keep things private sometimes, lessens the conversations, lessens the comments. And it contains a lot of what you're going through for yourself and for the people that are involved with you. We always encourage you to have fun senior year. It's a busy time, but please ensure that you're putting time aside. Now more than ever, it's a bit more difficult, but just, if it's a walk around the block, if it's scheduling just that every time throughout the day that you're doing something that is, maybe you're enjoying a bath, maybe you're listening to music, maybe you're reading a book, chatting on the phone with friends. You cannot constantly be on all the time, and you cannot constantly be thinking about college or the college process all the time, because you will burn yourself out. And like Ms. Williams said, there is a finite amount of energy throughout this process that you need to be mindful of. We are human beings, and it's normal for people to get tired, to get overwhelmed. Two tangible pieces of advice that I want to give all of you is remember to breathe. And what I always tell students is, if you feel yourself, getting anxious, if you feel yourself getting a bit overwhelmed, there's this technique called the 4-7-8 breathing. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold it for 7, and then you blow it out very slowly in 8 seconds, and it should regulate your breathing, which will physically help your body. And I also want you to think about your sleep hygiene. Think about what are you putting into your body, but also, what do you do in your bed? And I say that in the most professional way, because, I've been, moving around my apartment. I'm on a Zoom meeting on my bed. I moved to my couch. So my brain is basically learning that my bed is no longer for sleeping. It's also for working. It's also for writing. And, if you have the privilege to have enough space to really differentiate where the work gets done and really train your brain to understand that the bed is for sleeping, because myself, Ms. Middleton, and Ms. Williams, we always hear that our students, sometimes they're not sleeping, they're anxious, they're staying up all night, they're working on things. And a big part of this entire process is that you need to rest and recharge yourself and recharge your brain to be able to go back and write a supplement, to be able to go back and look at your essay again that you've looked at 100 times. It's okay to take breaks. It's okay to talk about things, and it's okay to stay organized. I always tell students, a lot of times things sound worse in here when you write them down or you go over them with somebody. A lot of times you realize that things aren't that bad. And sometimes if it's, assigning a deadline to keep you on track, we're here with you every step of the way. But I absolutely can't stress enough, remember to breathe, remember to have fun, and absolutely remember to talk about your feelings.
And with that, I think my colleagues, I can't see the Q&A answers, but I think my colleagues have been answering some of those along the way. So Kalia, Lewis, do you have questions that we might want to answer live?
Yes. So one question is, Without being hard and fast, is once a week a recommended frequency for meetings our child should schedule with their counselor.
I would say if
So
your student feels like he or she needs it, or they need
second.
it, happy to help.
I second that. I think there are some students who do well with independent work. There's other students that maybe need to kind of bounce their ideas and work off with the counselor. Other students like check-ins, just to kind of make sure that they're organized and to kind of verbalize things and then leave with another set of to-do lists. Whatever the student needs is what we're going to honor.
And I think one thing to keep in mind is, even though we're not in the build, it was a lot easier when we're in the building and, you know, we haven't seen a student in a couple of days and maybe we need to check in with them to roam the hallways and find them. We're still roaming our virtual hallways and finding your children. So if they have not made an appointment with us or we feel like they're being a little bit silent or hiding from us, we will reach out to them to make sure that they're staying on track of things and making meetings with us, or we'll schedule the meeting with them directly. Another question is, are the students' coursework loads reduced a bit during the college application season? I mean, I can answer that one. Typically, no. You know, one of the things we want students to do is to learn how to balance being students and having other responsibilities. It's something that they'll have to do when they go off to college. We don't ask our teachers to reduce homework during the college application season, but they know students are under a little bit of stress, and I think they're mindful of that. I'm sure Mr. Stein can speak to that a little bit because you teach seniors, or you have taught seniors in the past, but typically you won't see a reduction in the homework.
Just a quick note again, like communication is key in those cases too. So just being in close communication with your teacher in case they're not aware. Teachers are very mindful, as Ms. Williams is saying.
Another question, it seems because of the pandemic, many colleges deferred acceptance students for the class of 2024 to begin in 2020. Some statistics have come out. Would you advise adding a college or two to the college list?
I would say the collective wisdom of especially colleagues at independent schools in New York City, so working with populations very similar to ours, been to make sure that students are adding a couple of more middles and foundations. Mm-hmm. So honestly, it's I think that what colleges are talking about, and I mentioned this a little bit in the beginning, but with what many colleges are talking about is they're concerned about their early decision numbers. And so we have students who often will choose an early decision route. So they may be in pretty good favor this year if that's the decision that they make. There are some institutions where they have allowed a good percentage of the class to defer. There's other institutions where the percentage hasn't changed all that much. You know, some of that information, as you said, is coming out, but some colleges hold that pretty close to the vest. You know, and it's hard to wrangle that information, or they'll give you a response that's much more like, it depends, the typical college response. So I think we're seeing impacts kind of all over the place. I think I've also heard colleges talk about expanding the size of their first year class because they've lost students that in the upper classes. So the class coming in, the incoming class, they want to make sure that they've shored up the students who are able to make their financial aid budgets work. Anything to add? Ms. Williams, Mr. Elman?
Yeah, I think one of the other things that I've heard from a couple of our colleagues on the other side is that they didn't see as many students as they thought defer. For some schools, like Harvey Mudd, for example, said they saw quite a few, but they don't typically see any. So having 5 or 10 students want to defer is new for them. And other schools said we didn't really allow students to defer. They either enrolled in the fall semester or they had to reapply. So there's a lot of, I mean, everybody's, you know, operating on a very different place where the deferrals are concerned and what that will mean for next year. And they're not always giving, like we were very fortunate to get such explicit information from our guests last week. Not every school is going to be that transparent.
I think you'll find also as you're making these kinds of decisions, we're going to tap into not only our collective expertise, but our contacts to see if there is additional information that we can glean, and not just from a newspaper article that makes blanket statements about percentages.
Yeah. And just to add, you know, with Ms. Middleton talking about, as counselors in the New York area, talking about as a collective how it might be wise to maybe add a Middleware Foundation and build more of that academic foundation for students applying for financial aid. It also might be wise to add a school or two that is more of a financial foundation. You know, understanding the landscape in terms of budgets and, you know, revenue changing, we don't necessarily have a crystal ball to know what that looks like. For the most part, it seems like everything's pretty good to go. But that's also, you know, conversations that you can have with your counselor in terms of finances and understanding if it's wise to add an extra school or two because cost.
An excellent point, Mr. Almonte. Thank you.
What advice can you provide to help students identify an essay topic?
I would say for me, what I think helps a student is talking it out. Like some students all absolutely always know that they have the topic, but I am going to make a shameless plug and say, come and speak with your counselor, because we have a really, you know, beautiful way of understanding how to get to know you. And knowing that we've had conversations and we know you, but get to know you more is what I mean. We have extensive questionnaires that we can ask you where just through casual questions and conversation, you know, we can be building off of each other and getting to know you more and realize like, oh, wow, have you ever thought about writing this for a college essay, or tell me more about that. But really a lot of times it's not necessarily that there is no essay topic, it's that there's so many to pick from. And what I really want to offer to the audience is understanding that, you know, the main story that you want to share should highlight who you are as a person, the essence of who you are as a person or your journey. But a lot of times it's from self-reflection and asking questions. Avoid, you know, trying to have a shock factor. Avoid trying to have a unique essay that no one's ever talked about, because there's thousands and thousands of essays submitted every year. This story should be unique to you. It should be unique to your personality and your experience. But building off of someone and having somebody reflect your ideas back to you and saying, wow, this is really unique and this is something so great about you, is, I think, the best way to find the topic if you can't find it on your own.
One thing that I'll add to that answer is, if you haven't discovered the My Drive section of SCORE, there's a document in there that's called Tips for Writing the College Essay. And part of it, with the last page of that document, I always find that the Common App questions are not very inspiring. So, you know, like Mr. Almonte, that I don't feel like that gives a student the best brainstorming ideas. We listed about 20 questions that are a bit more unique than that question. I had one student just recently who picked 4 of them, wrote sort of paragraphs on 4 of them. And from that, we'll probably be able to come up with a final topic, because they've inspired a little bit more of sort of those brainstorm juices. So please come and talk to us. Please allow us to help you with that brainstorming.
What is your honest opinion on the SAT now being optional? There is a universe between test blind to optional. If the SAT is taken, how to decide if to send the scores to colleges or not in this environment of test optional / COVID?
I would say, I would start by, oh, Kalia, you go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just thinking about something that I heard the director of admission at a pretty selective place say today. And it's been like running through my mind all day. And he said that the SAT has more power in the collective minds of students and parents than it actually does in the admission process. And so I mean, I think schools that have made that choice to go test optional are committed to making that choice to be test optional. And it's not really something they have to learn how to do, because the application process is made up of so many different parts. They know how to lean in on the transcript a little bit more, to weigh that more heavily than they might have before, or to look at that essay or use their supplemental essays a little bit more than they might have done, with testing as a big part of it. So one thing I'm really heartened by is that schools are taking it very seriously and they're really committed to it.
Yeah. And
Sorry,
then
Ms. Middleton.
in terms of the second part of the question, first building off of what I said, there are institutions that do this all the time that have been test optional for years and they still craft their class. So to reiterate, this is nothing new or no one's reinventing the wheel. It's just they're adopting a different type of process. And then with the second part, in understanding if the SAT is taken, how to decide to send the scores to colleges. Scores are pretty transparent. Colleges are pretty transparent about what their median range is. And that's usually a hotspot that if you're, in the range and towards the higher end, it's a pretty safe bet, or above it, it's a pretty safe bet that like your testing should be shared. But if you're outside that range or towards the lower end, it's probably a conversation that's worth visiting with your college counselor, because that might be something that if you don't reveal, your application is going to stand alone and be the strongest it possibly can without showing, something that's at the lower end of the medium or below it that might kind of ding you in the application process and start some conversation about a lower score.
I think that's the most excited we've ever been to talk about standardized testing, that we cut Ms. Middleton off. We're so sorry.
I was like, let me jump in. I'm next. Sorry about that.
Sorry, we revealed our bias.
Based on the chart that you shared earlier, it seems that if a student is applying to 10 schools, only 2 to 3 will be reaches. Is that right? It seems like a lower number of reach schools.
I would say it kind of depends upon the applicant.
Yeah.
There's what's inherent in a reach school is that it has a nature of unpredictability, especially when we're talking about the most selective colleges out there. So sometimes when I'm sitting with the student who has an incredibly strong profile and they're looking at some of the most selective places, most selective colleges out there, they may add a few more than that because the unpredictability is kind of spread pretty wide. So it really depends upon the student and how that balance comes across. I think what you want to make sure that you're focusing on is that your middle and your foundation schools are places where you also think you'll be happy, because you'll find intellectual communities at a variety of different places, and you'll find peers that are just as incredibly intensely smart as you are at a variety of different places. So making sure that you've got a balance list, but that balance might be a little bit different from student to student.
Mm-hmm. And that's partly why we sit down with every student's list and review it as a group, just to make sure that you're hitting all the right notes. That was our last question in the Q&A box.
Yay! Just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to Mr. Stein, and thank you to all of you for sticking around. We really appreciate being able to deliver this information to you, and we look forward to meeting with you.